One was a Queen of England who burned 300 Protestants alive trying to save her country's soul. The other was a Confederate guerrilla turned bank robber who killed his way through a country still recovering from the Civil War. Both already won their first matchups in this series. Both now face elimination. Only one of them moves on. Tonight, Queen Mary I of England and Jesse James. The wildcard round begins. In episode 17, Mary I defeated Elizabeth Bathory by a margin so narrow it depended on what counted as historical evidence. In episode 14, Jesse James outlasted Bonnie and Clyde, the romantic outlaws who could not match his patience or his body count. Tonight, the patient Catholic against the patient Confederate. One of them is going home. Welcome back to Evil vs. Evil, Monsters of History. This is the wildcard round. This is episode 21. Born in the Palace of Placentia, in Greenwich, England, in 1516, Mary Tudor was the only surviving legitimate child of King Henry VIII and his first wife, Catherine of Aragon. She was raised believing she would one day be Queen of England, until the age of 17, when her father divorced her mother, declared her illegitimate, and threw her out of the line of succession to marry Anne Boleyn. Mary spent the next 20 years in a state of internal exile. She was forbidden to see her dying mother. She was forced to serve in the household of her half-sister Elizabeth, the infant daughter of the woman who had replaced her mother. She nearly broke down. She held on to two things: her Catholic faith and her conviction that the crown of England was rightfully hers. When her father died in 1547, the throne went first to her sickly younger half-brother, Edward VI, who died at 15. The Protestant nobility then tried to install Lady Jane Grey, a teenage cousin, as queen, in order to keep England Protestant. Mary, with the support of the English people, raised an army and rode into London to claim her birthright. Lady Jane Grey was beheaded. Mary I became the first queen regnant in English history. She married Philip II, the future King of Spain, in a match deeply unpopular with the English public, who feared Spanish domination. She revived the medieval heresy laws. Between 1555 and 1558, 283 English men and women were burned alive at the stake for refusing to renounce their Protestant faith. The executions were public spectacles in market squares across England. The condemned ranged from elderly bishops to teenage apprentices to a blind woman to a pregnant woman who gave birth inside the flames. The infant, after being saved by bystanders, was thrown back into the fire on the orders of the local sheriff. Mary's reign also saw two false pregnancies, each one publicly announced and then humiliatingly retracted, deepening the country's contempt for her marriage and her judgment. Her husband Philip returned to Spain. He never came back. She died on November 17, 1558, at the age of 42, possibly of uterine or ovarian cancer. Her half-sister Elizabeth, the daughter of Anne Boleyn, became queen the same day. Within months of Mary's death, she was being called Bloody Mary in popular songs. That was Mary I, the queen who tried to save her country's soul and burned it instead. Born in Kearney, Missouri, in 1847, Jesse Woodson James was the third of 4 children of a Baptist minister and a fierce, controlling mother named Zerelda. The James family owned slaves. They were proud, violent, and aggressively Southern in a state that had been torn in half by the Civil War before Jesse was old enough to shave. In 1863, 16-year-old Jesse and his older brother Frank joined the Confederate guerrilla force led by William Quantrill, the most infamous bushwhacker of the American Civil War. They rode with Quantrill's lieutenant, Bloody Bill Anderson, a man who decorated his saddle and bridle with the scalps of dead Union soldiers. Jesse participated in the Centralia Massacre of September 1864, in which Anderson's men ambushed and slaughtered 24 unarmed Union soldiers on a train, then killed and scalped 120 more Union militiamen who came to investigate. When the war ended in 1865, Jesse James was not yet 18 years old. He had already participated in more combat than most professional soldiers. He had also been radicalized into a worldview in which the federal government was the enemy and robbery of railroads, banks, and Yankee businessmen was a continuation of the war by other means. In February 1866, Jesse, Frank, and a handful of former Confederate guerrillas robbed the Clay County Savings Bank in Liberty, Missouri. It was the first daylight peacetime bank robbery in American history. A teenage boy outside the bank was killed in the getaway. Over the next 16 years, the James Younger gang would rob more than 24 banks, trains, and stagecoaches across the American Midwest. They killed an estimated dozen civilians, guards, and lawmen along the way. Jesse cultivated his press carefully. He wrote letters to friendly Confederate sympathizing newspapers explaining that his gang was robbing only Yankee institutions. He became, to a defeated white South, a folk hero. To the rest of the country, he was a terrorist with a brand. On April 3rd, 1882, one of the new recruits to a rebuilt James gang, a 20-year-old named Robert Ford, watched Jesse stand on a chair to hang a picture on the wall, drew his pistol, and shot Jesse in the back of the head for a $5,000 reward offered by the governor of Missouri. Jesse James was 34 years old. That was Jesse James, the Confederate guerrilla who never stopped being one. Now let us put these two figures side by side in the wild card. Category 1, body count. Mary I officially ordered the deaths of 283 Protestants by burning, plus several hundred more in famine and rebellion linked to her policies. Jesse James and his various gangs killed an estimated 12 to 15 people across 16 years of bank and train robberies, plus the 144 Union soldiers and militiamen killed at the Centralia massacre during the war. Depending on whether you count Centralia, Mary edges Jesse by a small margin in pure civilian deaths. Including Centralia, Jesse edges Mary. Call this category a tie. Category 2, power held. Mary I was a sovereign queen with absolute legal authority over an entire nation of approximately 3 million people. Every burning required her signature. Jesse James was a bandit with a horse, a rifle, and a network of family farms where he hid from federal marshals. He had no formal power of any kind. The edge here, decisively, is Mary. Category 3, capacity for greater damage. This is the wildcard round category. Given more time, more resources, more authority, who would have done more damage to humanity? Mary I died young, at 42, of probable uterine cancer. Had she lived another 20 years and produced an heir with Philip of Spain, England remains a Catholic kingdom. The Protestant Reformation in the English-speaking world is delayed or destroyed. The American colonies are founded under different religious assumptions. The British Empire that follows is unrecognizable, and possibly millions of additional people are caught up in centuries of religious counter-violence. Jesse James, by contrast, was operating at the absolute ceiling of his capability. Even given another 20 years, he would have robbed more banks and killed perhaps another 24 people. His ceiling was small. Mary's ceiling was civilizational. The edge is Mary, by an order of magnitude. Category 4, cultural mythology. Mary became Bloody Mary, the name still whispered in mirrors at sleepovers 450 years after her death. Jesse James became the model for the American outlaw, the subject of over 30 Hollywood films, and the prototype for every cowboy criminal in American storytelling. Both are immortal. The edge in cinematic cultural footprint, narrowly, is Jesse. The edge in pure global recognition, narrowly, is Mary. Category 5, method and intimacy of violence. Mary delegated her violence. She signed warrants. She did not light the fires. Jesse pulled triggers personally. He killed men in saloons, in alleyways, and on horseback. His violence was, in every confirmed case, his own hand. The edge and personal capability for direct violence is Jesse. So the category split 2-2 with one tie. By a hair, but by an important hair. Here is the wildcard question. What if they had switched centuries? Imagine Mary I as a frontier matriarch in 1880s Missouri. With her religious certainty, her fierce intelligence, and her absolute willingness to authorize violence in defense of her cause, she might have become the most dangerous figure in the post-war American West. She would have built a religious community. She would have outlasted the federal marshals. She would have been far more dangerous than Jesse ever was. Now imagine Jesse James born into the Tudor court of 1530. A semi-literate outlaw with no training in statecraft, no understanding of Catholic theology, no political coalition. He would not have lasted 6 months. He would have been hanged in his teens for stealing horses from the king's stable. Each figure was operating perfectly within the limits of his or her era. Each one would have failed completely in the others. The verdict. Mary I advances. Jesse James is eliminated. The decision comes down to ceiling, not floor. Both achieved roughly comparable damage in their own context. But Mary had her hand on the levers of an entire kingdom. Jesse had his hand on a gun. In a tournament designed to find the figure capable of the most damage in human history, the queen who could have permanently rewritten the religious history of the English-speaking world is the more dangerous of the two. But here is the part that should disturb you. Jesse James, in his actual lifetime, killed perhaps 15 people in cold blood and is remembered as a folk hero. Mary I, in her actual lifetime, ordered the deaths of nearly 300 people in writing, with her signature on every warrant, and is remembered as a bedroom mirror game. The killer with a horse became a legend. The killer with a throne became a joke. History's not always fair about who gets remembered as what. Mary was the queen who burned. Jesse was the outlaw who shot. Mary I moves on to the round of 16. Jesse James is going home. Next episode. The criminal wild card continues. Dennis Rader, the BTK killer, against Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. Two American serial killers who terrorized the country in the same decade. Two completely different methods. Only one of them advances.